Hey YouTube, Kira Tweak here, bringing you all an update to my Timelord Yugioh deck profile. I wanted to update the Timelord deck. It's been a good couple years since the last time I updated this Yu-Gi-Oh deck. This was used by the final antagonist of the Yu-Gi-Oh 5D series, Zone, and this deck focuses on being able to summon out the many different Time Lords to the field, getting different monster effects depending on which Time Lord you have on the field, and basically just being able to dwindle down your opponent's life points, having it be extremely difficult to get rid of one of the Time Lords on the field, and then make use of the specific ones you want for a specific play when you've whittled down your opponent's life points to nothing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So we'll go ahead and start off with our Time Lord monsters, running 2 copies of Sandion, the Time Lord. It cannot be special summoned from the deck. You can only control 1 Sandion, the Time Lord. If your opponent controls a monster, you can normal summon this card without attributing. It cannot be destroyed by battle or card effect. Neither player takes battle damage from attacks involving this card, and at the battle phase of this card battles, inflict 2,000 damage to your opponent. You go during the standby phase, shuffle this card into the deck. So while they have very similar effects for how they can be summoned out, and then the shuffle back during the standby, they all have varying effects for when they battle on the field as well. So Sandion is more or less the one that will dwindle down your opponent's life points with a guarantee for a burn to, drop them down to 0 life points. But when we're running the 2, it is a pretty powerhouse card for the 4,000 attack that it has on top of that. If you want to run a 3rd copy, you can adjust some of the other numbers for the Time Lords we run. But we are also running 2 copies of Lazion, the Time Lord, having these same restrictions and protections as our other Time Lords. You take no battle damage from attacks involving this card. At the end of the battle phase, if it battled, shuffle all cards from your opponent's graveyard into their deck, and once per turn, if your opponent draws a card, inflict 1,000 damage to your opponent. So this is just more burn damage on top of the reaction to being able to take away all their resources from their graveyard, which can shut down a good number of decks depending on what you shuffle back into the deck that their opponent then has to reset up again. And also 3 copies of Sandion, the Time Lord. With this card, you take no battle damage from battles involving this card again. If this card battled and your opponent's life points is less than 4,000, your life points become 4,000 once per turn during your standby phase. Shuffle this card into the deck. So basically with this card, and if your life points are less than 4,000, it allows you to regain those life point count back up to an amount, which could definitely be better than the situation you were currently in going up against your opponent. So very, very useful as just a card to rely on for that recycle power. And another 3 of is 3 Mikion, the Time Lord. It cannot be special summoned from the deck once again, and you take no battle damage from battles involving this card. If this card battled, half your opponent's life points, and once per turn in the standby phase, shuffle this card into the deck. Being able to reduce your opponent's life points down to 4,000 is another big part of this card, because then with other cards we run, like our Sandion, being able to then hit for that bigger damage once our opponent's life points are at 4,000, meaning this could be the game-winning combo setup, and why Mikion is definitely a 3 of. We're also running 2 copies of Halon, the Time Lord. With this card, if your life points are lower than your opponent's, inflict damage to your opponents equal to the difference, and once per turn during the standby phase, shuffle this card into the deck. So being able just to reduce your opponent's life points down to the burn damage with this card also does come in handy for the fact that you can just interrupt a big gap in life points if your opponent's able to hit you for that damage, and you're able to just cling on to life and then swing down with Halon to reduce it down to, once again, another point in life where your Sandion could also come into play with that. And for the 1-ofs for our bigger Time Lord monsters, the 1 Zaphion, the Time Lord, for the shuffle back power of spell and traps our opponent controls into the deck. The 1 Meta-Ion, the Time Lord, being able to, with this card, return all monsters on the field to the hand and inflict 300 damage to your opponent for each card return. The 1 Gabrion, the Time Lord, for with this card, if it battles, shuffle as many cards your opponent controls as possible into the deck, then they draw cards equal to the number shuffled. And lastly, the 1 Camion, the Time Lord, with this card, shuffling 1 card your opponent controls to the deck and inflicting 500 damage to your opponent. So more of a selective effect with some of these. They're 1-ofs just for the fact that they are specific with the different card effects that you can make use of with these Time Lords. But one of the easier ways to make use of the different Time Lords we run come in the form of Time Maiden, which we also run 3 copies of. If you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. This card can be treated as 2 tributes for the tribute summon of a Time Lord monster. You can tribute this card to add 1 Time Lord with 0 attack from your deck to your hand, and you can banish this card from your graveyard to special summon one Time Lord monster with 0 attack from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. You cannot special summon other monsters the turn you activate this effect, but still, it is a great way to set up a specific Time Lord that you may need on your field, giving you that special summon and setup power to then tribute, add, and special summon all in one for that one Time Lord that you want to make use of on the field. And then lastly, for the main deck monsters, 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, just the hand trap of choice to run along with the restrictive powers of the Time Lords that we run in the deck. For the spells, we run 3 copies of Advanced Draw. I really do like this card in the deck. While you can rely on your Time Lord monsters for that added protection of being able to get around on your opponent's turn by not being able to be destroyed by battle or card effects, you could have that added setup for draw power in the form of the spell, being able to tribute that face-up level 8 or higher monster and draw 2 cards, giving you access to some more different Time Lord monsters when you do so. More draw power to always have the resources for our Time Lords as well come in the form of 3 Pot of Extravagance, just so we can have those Time Lords to summon on the field. I would say the biggest weakness is when you're just dwindled down to not having anything left. If you just have cards and no Time Lords, you can rely on cards like Pot of Extravagance to then potentially draw in to those needed Time Lords to summon out. The 1-ofs we run for our spells include the 1 copy of 1-for-1, the 1 Mound the Bound Creator, along with the 1 Terraforming to search it out, the 1 Call by the Grave, and also the 1 Pot of Prosperity, more specific searching, and the 1 Monster Reborn to grab a resource back from the graveyard since the Time Lords just can't be special summoned from the deck. And then for the traps, now I know the Time Lords have the infinite traps to run in the deck as well, the 0 all the way up to infinite trap lineup for special summoning. Now, just for the fact that they are trap cards, they are a little slower for the setup, so I'm not running them in this version of the deck. If you wanted to run them, you would run 3 copies of 0 and then decrease the count all the way down to the infinity, so a 3-2-1 count for all 3 versions of the traps, which would equate to 6 traps in total, which you can replace with the trap lineup that I am running in the deck, which are the 3 copies of Blazing Mirror Force and the 3 copies of Torrential Tribute. Since your Time Lord monsters can't be destroyed by card effects, you can use Torrential to basically clear out your opponent's board while keeping your Time Lord on the field, and Blazing Mirror Force with all of the different burn damage that you can do in this deck. You can use that burn damage for your Time Lords, and then when your opponent's monster declares an attack, destroy as many attack as your monster your opponent controls as possible, and then if you do take damage equal to half the combined original attack of those monsters, then inflict the damage to your opponent. So as long as you can reduce your opponent's life points down to lower than your own, Blazing Mirror Force can finish the game with that added burn damage and destruction of your opponent's monsters. And then for the extra deck, since we are running cards like Pot of Prosperity and Extravagance, we run a pretty much generic lineup for the extra deck, since they'll most of the time be banished randomly anyway. The 1 Relinquished Anima, 1 Dark the Dark Charmer, 1 Donner Dagger for Hire, 1 Nightmare Cerberus, 1 Hippo Shenangan, 1 Kashtira Unicorn, along with the 1 Underworld Goddess of the Closed World, the 1 IP Masquerena, the 1 SP Little Knight, and the 1 Nightmare Phoenix, with the Xyz monsters, which we definitely never really go into. They're just in here as potential options with cards like Monster Reborn, or if our monster is special summoned by other means, the 1 Sky Palace Gongora Dai, the 1 Gustav Max, the 1 number 81, the 1 Sky Crisis, and the 1 Zeus to finish off the extra deck. And then as for some of the go-to plays of the deck, as I mentioned before, the biggest setup just comes down to the Time Lord that you are given access to use against your opponent. Your opponent has to deal with the different Time Lord that you will summon out each turn. If you have cards like your Time Maiden, then you have just this special summon and grab for a more specific Time Lord. So this is why she's definitely a 3-of, because then you can use her to grab that specific monster you want out onto the field and use against your opponent, either disrupting their own plays or using that burn damage power that we have in the deck to whittle down their life points to next to nothing when we do so, and then hitting for game with some of the other trap setup that we run in the deck as well. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoy. Once again, if you wanted to substitute for the time traps in the deck, you could just replace the Blazing Mirror Force and the Torrential Tributes for that trap lineup and run the other trap traps to add another special summon power, but once again, it just takes a little bit longer to set up since you have to use the traps to summon out into the other traps as well to do so. But until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.